All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. Remember, Myanmar hit the headlines for the wrong reasons on the 1st of February when the military suddenly seized control and detained its elected lawmakers. And the United States has now threatened Myanmar with certain targeted sanctions. US President Joe Biden has said that Myanmar's military must relinquish power and that they should release all the lawmakers and activists who have been detained.
There can be no doubt in a democracy, force should never seek to overrule the will of the people or attempt to erase the outcome of a credible election. The Burmese military should relinquish power they have seized, release the advocates and activists and officials they have detained, lift the restrictions on telecommunications, and refrain from violence.
Now, the United Nations Security Council has called for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and others detained by the military. The UN body has also voiced concerns over the state of emergency, but the Security Council has stopped short of condemning the coup.
The members of the Security Council expressed deep concern at the declaration of the state of emergency imposed in Myanmar by the military on the 1st of February and the arbitrary detention of members of the government, including State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win Myint and others. They called for the immediate release of all those detained. The members of the Security Council emphasised the need for the continued support of the democratic transition in Myanmar. They stressed the need to uphold democratic institutions and processes, refrain from violence, and fully respect human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law.
Now, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in a tweet has said that it is unacceptable to reverse the results of the elections and the will of the people of Myanmar. He also said that he hopes that democracy will be able to make progress again and that all prisoners must be released. Now, India has also issued a statement on the current situation in Myanmar. India said that it is committed to continuing with the humanitarian support for the people of Myanmar. Meanwhile, Indonesia and Malaysia both have called on Myanmar to resolve the political differences. Now, both the countries have also sought a special meeting with the foreign ministers of the nation to discuss the situation in Myanmar. Meanwhile, a key aide of Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi was also arrested on Friday. Now, the National League for Democracy has issued a statement on the arrest, saying that the Burmese politician Win Myint, who was arrested from his daughter's residence, the Myanmar's military has continued with its crackdown on lawmakers and protesters. Now, according to the activist group, the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, at least about 147 people have been detained in Myanmar since the coup. Now, the detainees include lawmakers, activists and officials from the ousted government of Aung San Suu Kyi. The lawmakers of National League for Democracy have gathered to sign a parliamentary pledge of oath at the Siben government residence. And also in a show of what is being described as a defiance to the generals, about a dozen of the lawmakers who were elected in the month of November convened a sort of a symbolic parliamentary session within the quarters where they are presently detained. Now, several people who are opposing the coup also protested, and this is how they went about protesting. They made a lot of noise by banging pots and pans for the third straight night. In one area of the largest city, Yangon, the residents again banged together their cooking utensils, bottles and plastic containers for nearly about 20 minutes to register their protest. The military authorities have warned people not to create instability, and there are fears that anyone who openly defies the orders of the military by stepping out onto the streets could face imminent arrest. The Myanmar's army seized power on Monday, overthrowing popular elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been detained and is now facing possible charges for import infringements. Alongside the broader allegation of electoral fraud, previous Myanmar juntas have had a history of bloody repression for street protests. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what's actually playing out in Hong Kong, we are joined in by journalist Dave Grunnebaum, who's joining us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much indeed, Dave, for joining us in this broadcast on WION. And let me begin by asking you this. There was this high-profile arrest of a close aide of Aung San Suu Kyi that was made overnight. Have there been further arrests that have been made?
We don't know since the arrest of Win Tain if there have been any arrests, and particularly if anybody is high profile. But this is very high profile. I mean, he's not well known outside of the country, but he is a much beloved figure by so many people inside Myanmar. Not only was he a top aide and a senior National League for Democracy official, he's been detained under sedition laws. Now, he's 79 years old. If he's tried, and if it's a trial under the military junta, it's as good as a conviction. And a conviction under sedition laws, he may never come out of prison again. He's been a longtime opponent of military rule. He was a political prisoner. And just earlier this week, in interviews with the press, he spoke out against the coup and against the senior commander-in-chief, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. So it's no surprise that he was arrested, given that. But the military is clearly trying to send a message that public dissent will not be tolerated, especially by someone as high-profile as him.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, what is being looked at very closely is in terms of how the people within Myanmar have, of course, responded. We have not heard of many street protests in the largest city, Yangon, but there are reports of protests that took place in the second largest city in Myanmar, in Mandalay. And according to reports that have come in, these protests were largely staged by the students. How widespread are these?
Right. So we had a demonstration yesterday that led to the arrest of at least 3 people. And within the past hour, there is now another demonstration started in Yangon, the biggest city. Dagon University students started demonstrating within the past hour. Now, I've been following the Twitter feeds of some local journalists there and seen some photographs. They were carrying the flag of the National League Democracy with their symbol, the peacock. It's a little tough to tell from these photographs exactly how many people there are, so we're going to have to keep an eye to see how big these grow and if the police crack down on this demonstration. Again, it started within the past hour.
Right. Now, also, people would actually want to ask this. This was, of course, a tenure that lasted a period of time that lasted for about 10 years, where Myanmar relatively had a semblance of democracy, but now the army has taken charge again. Now, for people who are looking at all of this unfolding in Myanmar from outside of Myanmar, what's happening? Because there are reports that suggest that this is more a sort of a clash of personalities between Aung San Suu Kyi and the military general Min Aung, who has now taken charge.
Yeah, the Commander-in-Chief, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, I mean, he was set to retire later this year when he turned 65. But he's, keep in mind, the army controls huge business interests there, and his business interests could potentially be in jeopardy if he were no longer in power. Secondly, he's also had his eyes on the presidency. But with the military's proxy party getting destroyed last November, any hopes of him at some point, anytime soon, becoming president were completely dashed. Him and Aung San Suu Kyi, they've never gotten along for understandable reasons. He was obviously hoping that maybe he could make some headway with her in the last few years, but she would not even talk to him about his presidential aspirations. So we're really in this situation for one primary reason, because of the ego, the attitude, and the ambitions of Senior General Min Aung Hlaing.
And also, in terms of reports that are coming out of Myanmar, it's being suggested, like you pointed out, the general was set to retire later this year. Now, Aung San Suu Kyi controversially defended the Rohingya genocide, and probably it was being said that she may not have defended the general once he would have retired. Is that something that's actually playing on the general's mind when he decided to take charge of the country?
It's a little hard to know exactly what he was thinking. Perhaps, I mean, there have been generals in the past that when they retire, they often lose their huge financial interests. A lot of things go downhill. It was hard to know what was going to happen after he retired. That's certainly been one, but it certainly would not have been the only thing. There would be a lot of things going on in his mind. And a big thing is he loves being in control. He loves being in power. And you can tell that right now by the fact that he is in charge in this military coup. Absolutely.
And my last question to you, Dave, is, a lot of nations around the world are asking that Aung San Suu Kyi should be released immediately. Is that something that the military junta in Myanmar is even thinking about at this point of time?
The last thing they want is Aung San Suu Kyi being given a way to talk directly to these demonstrators in a way that might lead them to further revolt. I mean, she did release a statement on Monday that was prepared in advance of the coup because they were anticipating a possible coup that told people not to accept it, to revolt against it non-violently, very clearly, civil disobedience, non-violently. But they do not want any more of that encouragement to come from her because she is the most influential person in the country.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Dave Grunebaum,
Sure,
for joining us and getting us all those insights on this developing story in Myanmar. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.